Good morning and thanks for joining me this morning for our session on media and PR for small business. My name is Kristy. I'm a presenter and an advisor for Business Station as part of the Commonwealth Government's Digital Solutions Program. Today we are going to go through a range of different information surrounding media and PR for small business. If you want to ask questions at any time, we would certainly encourage that. Please use either the chat or the Q&A functionality and pop your questions in. I'll stay on for a couple of minutes at the end of the session to answer any additional questions. But yeah, please do feel free to shoot them through as we go as well. Okay, so what we're going to go through today specifically is we're going to look at the importance of PR. We're going to define media and PR and media relations, so talk about the difference between some of those terms and what their function really is. We'll talk about generating publicity for your own business, which incorporates working with influencers. We'll look at the customer journey, and then we'll tie in social media and your PR strategy around that as well. So a bit to get through. Some of the social media stuff that we'll discuss, do keep in mind that that does lead on to some of our other training around social media and various topics. So I'll sort of point that out as we go as well. Okay, so just firstly to define what media is. Well, media is really the main means of mass communication. It's where information is delivered to the public, generally through newspapers, through magazines, television, radio, and then there's a million different ways online that this information is delivered as well. Most people, when they think of the term media, they do think more traditional media or news outlets, but it really isn't the case. There is just so much going on online, and it's so much more than just traditional newspaper. And there's a lot that people will experience on a daily basis, like social media. There's influential bloggers, YouTube influencers, there's a range of different online publications or podcasts, and all of those things can actually be harnessed to really help publicize your small business. So no matter how big or small, we can sort of use some of those tools for publicity. Now, in a more traditional sense, journalists and reporters were the people that sort of wrote or presented the news and feature stories, and then editors controlled that final content. But what has shifted is that these days, editors don't control final content, and particularly when you look at online, everyone controls the content. So we'll talk a bit about that as we go. Now, what you see on the screen here is the PESO model. This is a media model strategy, and PESO stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned media. Now, I think it's really important to understand what you're doing as a small business owner or a marketing manager in PR, media, and marketing, and where it fits into this model, because I believe that you really have to use a variety of strategies across different mediums. Now, in the past, your paid media was a primary focus of advertising, earned media was a primary focus of PR, and shared and owned wasn't really anyone's focus or anyone's space. But today, there's so much crossover that each element has to be a key focus in your business. So I would encourage you to have a think about this model and have a think about these four sort of key areas, and maybe even write down what you're doing in each of those spaces at the moment. Considering paid is essentially advertising. It could be advertorials or sponsorships. It could be sponsored content, so content online that you pay for. It could include ads on the TV, radio, in print, anything paid. Even obviously your online paid activities like pay-per-click, your Google AdWords, social media advertising, and that kind of thing. Earned is then your news coverage. And that's really when you've earned the opportunity, and often that comes as a result of really good media relations, which we'll talk about, to appear in some kind of story. Media is the specific publication, well, it's in the specific publication as press coverage, but it then will most likely, even if it is an offline publication, it will most likely have an online component, which may include things like backlinks back to your website. Earned media has the potential to reach a lot more customers than paid or owned media. And then you've got shared media, which is essentially social media or user-generated content. So it's not created by you as such. It's generally created by your people or the public, and it does constantly evolve. So what happens in this shared space, I find, can really be a result of not only your marketing, but also your customer service. Because a lot of what happens in person and with people's interactions with you actually goes online, and you really can't afford any negative relations with your customers at any stage of their purchase cycle or of their journey with you, because this is the space that it can come out. Then you've got your owned assets. Think about your web content, for example, or owned media with any content that you've created and you have full control over. So yes, your website, but it could also be a blog. You might write an ebook or have white papers or presentations. So if you fully control the content and its distribution, so if you can add to it, edit it, delete it, then you probably own it. Now, each of these categories is a lot more effective when they're used in conjunction with one another than they are in isolation. So we will refer back to the peso model a little bit. Certainly keep this in mind. And like I said, I'd really encourage you to at least just write down these 4 areas and think about what you're currently doing from a marketing or a PR perspective at the moment in each of those areas. And if there's a gap, if there's a particular space that you're not doing anything, that's a really good indicator that you need to work on that particular area. Okay, then we look at what PR is. PR, public relations, is essentially a strategic communication process. And through that process, you build mutually beneficial relationships between your organization and the public. So in my opinion, to simplify that, PR is having a good strategy plus the ability to tell a story really well. Now, as a small business, you might not think that you're in the need of public relations, but I think that you absolutely are. Going back to that peso model, this is really your earned, but also your shared space. So you really need to fill that gap if you're not already. And public relations becomes a really crucial element of the success, or to the success, sorry, of every business, no matter how big or small. The main difference I find is that if you're a small business, you're trying to do everything yourself. You'll be a lot more budget conscious, so you don't really have that luxury of hiring a high-priced PR firm or PR organization. So you do have to have a more DIY approach. And really look at mastering your own public relations. And that's essentially what we're going to get to by the end of today. Now, before we go into that anymore, I think it's really interesting to have a look at a bit of an old versus new scenario here at how the media space has evolved. So think about in the past, brands controlled the messages and customers were really passive receptors. So let's say, you know, as a business, you had a message you wanted to get out to the public. You would use a publicist who would become a bit of a spin doctor. They would have amazing relationships with the media, and they would pass that message on. And as passive receptors, customers would sort of believe what they're being told. However, now it's a very different scenario. Customers are more empowered than ever before, and everyone owns your message. There's also a lot of simultaneous communications going on, and traditional media just become one of those outlets. But a lot of what we see now happens in the social media space and online. So generating positive media coverage or publicity is a core function of a public relation professional or a PR person, but it is just one of many of those functions. So a publicist as such really, you know, gets a tactical result in terms of coverage in a particular publication or something like that, whereas a PR professional, we will be looking at that entire peso model and how it all connects and how you can engage customers as well to help tell your story. So hopefully that makes sense. But the key message, I guess, with this image is that customers are more empowered than they have ever been before. They are not passive receptors. So we really have to embrace that and get them on board and get them to tell your story as well. Okay, so to get publicity, you have to have good media relations or good relationships with the media. Now, it's important for your business and it's important for journalists and the media because they enjoy dealing with people that can assist them in their job. So if you can make their job that little bit easier, it's going to be a win for both your organisation and for the relevant media outlet. The media is a lot more fast-paced now than it has ever been. So people that are involved in the media don't have time to research stories for themselves. If you can provide them with an easy story, that is interesting, that suits their audience, then it could be a win for you both. But you do really need to understand and have a really good, I guess, grasp on how the various outlets will suit your business, but also what their audience is all about as well. So the first tip that I have in terms of how you can start to build media relations is to develop a news sense. So that will be the crucial element to really understanding who you're dealing with and who you want to actually be covered by in a media sense. You have to know what each outlet presents, what sort of information, and what sort of audience they have. So that could be an audience, it could be listeners, it could be readers, followers. So just really have a look at that. Now, you can look at their past articles and determine things like what they like to write about. Understand whether they are a news outlet or whether they're, more feature sort of journalists or journalism. Also understand whether they are appealing to a consumer audience or a trade audience. Consumer media will look for stories that appeal to the public, whilst trade will be more interested in material that is of interest to the specific industry. So you really have to keep a couple of things in mind. Now, in my opinion, the best way to do that is just by becoming part of the audience yourself, be engaging with them, having a look at what they are publishing, what sort of stories are getting the most traction, the most interest, what the audience is actually commenting when you start to look at social media and that kind of thing. So really become a follower yourself. I would also have a look at lead times and really consider the lead times, but know what the lead times are and the deadlines are for the media that you're targeting. So news items for print, for example, for radio, for television, they have short lead times. Anything online can appear very quickly. Whereas if you're looking at more traditional media, magazines, that kind of thing, the feature articles might be planned well in advance, and it could be months in advance that they are actually working on what's going to be covered as part of those stories. So really understand the lead times for various publications. Get to know people, specific people, get the names of journalists and their contact details, find out how they best like to receive media releases or information, and keep a bit of a database. So keep that list up to date. How you get the names of those people, it can be the challenge. I would suggest that you look at any kind of, publication or anywhere that they've actually stated who a journalist is. Now, you see this in newspaper, magazine, that kind of thing. Not sometimes online by way of blogs, not social media posts generally, but do a little bit of research and click through to some of those articles and find that information out. Then use tools like LinkedIn to try and find out more information. Sometimes through networking, you can get to know people that are involved in the media as well. Or the other idea is to look at your own industry. If you've got memberships with industry organisations, chances are they would have a good relationship with the media. So you can certainly reach out to them and try and get contacts that way. I would say always be accurate, provide accurate information, provide that information on time. For example, if you start to engage with someone, you've worked on developing a relationship with them, you've got a bit of a news story, I would make sure that you do have all of the facts and it is correct. If you are then the contact on a media release, make sure that you're very responsive to any questions and getting back to them, very quickly. I'd also say invite the media to see or experience your product or service if and when that's appropriate. Now, that might not suit all businesses, but you could have any kind of business, from a hospitality outlet to some kind of service-based business where you've identified a particular media contact, you've invited them to come and see you, to experience your product or service, whether or not that's an event, so for a specific launch or something like that, or just as part of your day-to-day business. They then write about it, cover it, take photos of it, that kind of thing. So that may or may not be appropriate to your style of business and the industry that you're in, but certainly something to consider. Now, you can only invite someone once you know what their name is, know about the publication that they're writing for, or the the social media platform that they, or the accounts that they manage. So you really have to kind of do all of these other steps in the lead up to something like an invitation. The other thing I would say is not to forget local media. Make an effort to get to know local media. People like community newspaper staff and editors, anyone, particularly if you are based regionally, that becomes more important, that you sort of get to know local media, because that can be a real opportunity to get coverage. Local media tend to always be looking for things that appeal to the community, and any kind of small business story or something that's happening in the actual geographic location of the community is generally going to get a good response. And they tend to be a little bit more hungrier for news. So keep that in mind. They don't just want to be repeating what the big stories are. Once you've got this database and you've really sort of defined it, I would say keep in regular contact with the people on the database if you can. Obviously, once you've established a relationship, you want to maintain that relationship. You don't want to be on there too often that you're annoying people, but you certainly do want to know if, you know, someone's leaving a particular role and moving somewhere else, or, you know, those kind of things only come about as part of maintaining a relationship and keeping in touch with people. So use the information that you obtain to develop a bit of a database, but follow people on LinkedIn, engage you know, as often as you can, I guess, from a database sort of perspective. Keep in mind that building media relations, we're sort of talking about doing this now with the aim of getting or gaining or earning media by way of publicity, and that is really just a tactic. Public relations needs to cover all four elements of that PESO model, and does require a bit of a planned strategy, and takes a little bit more time. So this is sort of just one element, and this is a very time-consuming element as well. So keep that in mind. Okay, so just continuing on with that earn space, publicity is all about spreading the word about your business through these non-advertising channels and earning media through good media relations. So let's say that you've worked really hard to develop a database, you've got good relationships with key media contacts that you have identified have an audience that perfectly matches the audience for your business, and you're maintaining a good relationship with them. You still have to give them something that is going to be newsworthy, or something that's happening that's time bound or unique, or has some kind of human interest element. You're going to have to supply them information on whatever that might be. Generally speaking, you'll provide them with some kind of imagery or video or footage, something to go along with that, some kind of visuals. And this thing, whatever it is, it has to perk their attention and the interest of their readers, viewers, listeners, followers. So it really has to be targeted to their audience as well. So once you've found that, that magic thing that you want to communicate that's going to be of interest to your audience, therefore their audience, you can communicate with them a number of ways. But the most common is really a media release. Writing a media release, and we're going to go through the structure of a media release, because that is really the most, I guess, expected but easiest way to communicate with the media. You can produce a newsletter. Perhaps your newsletter goes out to your database of consumers, past customers, that kind of thing. But you have a media a component to that, so a segment that is just focused on the media. But in any case, you're going to have some good visuals to go along with it. So photos, images, or video that really adds to the content that you're speaking about. We're very much, you know, by way of media and PR, it's very much a visual language now. So you do need to have those visuals. You can then use distribution centers to get that message out as well. And you can use social media, making sure that you share, tag, hashtag the various outlets or individuals that you're trying to get the attention of. But the most common is certainly writing a media release. Okay, so having a look at the media release, as I said, it's the most common way to generate publicity. It's essentially, if you haven't heard of it before, it's a document that you send out to the media that details anything that could be classified as news. Journalists will generally take this media release, and if they find it interesting, they're going to write an article about whatever your story is. Now, depending on the journalist and the publication, a lot of the time they'll publish what they read in that media release. So there's not as much fact checking as there used to be, essentially. So you might have seen this a bit on social media. A lot of the time it's the public correcting journalists who are just, publishing what they've been told, essentially. And that really happens because the news world is so fast paced. Most outlets would rather be first to publish something, even if it's a bit inaccurate, than waste time checking facts and be the last to publish something, even if it's 100% accurate. So do keep that in mind. If you've got something newsworthy and someone picks it up, make sure that it is 100% accurate. Now, if someone does pick it up, you're going to get quite a bit of promotion for your business. It's got to be free promotion. It could be in a newspaper or magazine publication. It could be on a social media channel. It could be blogs. But most of the time, even if it is traditional, like I said earlier, it will be covered more than just in print. They will have that online element as well. So you get that free marketing through that media avenue that's published your media release. Generally, via their website, you'll get some kind of link or your name, your name featured. And that hopefully will result in increased traffic to your website. So it is a great way to build your brand, but also to gain a bit of credibility within the industry amongst other businesses, but also amongst consumers. Those links that you get, backlinks from the various outlets to your website, are great for SEO as well. So search engine optimization. We do we do a number of webinars and workshops on SEO. So if you want to know more about that, certainly reach out, but just know that any of those backlinks are going to be great for SEO as well. But you have to keep in mind, it is very competitive. You have to make sure that your media release is the one that grabs the attention of journalists. The best media releases that I have seen are written in this inverted pyramid format that you see on your screen. So we're going to go through that in terms of structure. Now, a couple of things I will say about a media release. First of all, it does take a bit of practice to get them right. Now, if you're a small business owner, or if you are in marketing, a media release is not like anything you would have written before. It's written in third person. It's very much factual information. It's a statement that goes to the media where they can turn that interesting information into a story. So it's not, you're not writing it as a story, as a finished story, essentially. So you would start with a headline. Headlines are really important. Now, generally speaking, and that's not stated there on that pyramid, but generally speaking, it's 5 to 7 words. It's the same thing that you would put as your subject line in an email that goes out to a database as well, to keep that in mind. So the headline should really grab the attention of whoever is reading it. So think about that and see if you can get something really catchy in 5 to 7 words, preferably around the 5 mark. Then you would have the lead. Now, the lead is the first part of your media release. This is really the most newsworthy information, the who, what, where, when, why. And this becomes a major hook to draw people into that next level. Now, when we say draw people in, you're really drawing the journalist in or the media outlet in, because remember, they're not going to publish a media release exactly how it's written word for word. They are going to turn it into some kind of story or take bits and pieces from this release to develop a story. You then have the body. The body is where you feature some of the important details about the story, or the main argument, if you like, and then you'll have evidence to back that up, and quotes. So quotes are really important, or any kind of evidence to back up what you're saying is really important. So if you're saying that, this product that you're releasing is that's the only product that exists in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's Australian made or West Australian made, or, whatever that main thing is, the main argument, you would then want someone to back that up. So let's say, it is a product, you might have a key figure from an industry association that says, yes, this is the first time we've seen an Australian developed product. It's the only product of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's not just a one person's opinion, you've now got someone backing that up. And that's where this evidence or quote sort of comes into it. You're looking for someone authoritative to the situation that can provide some kind of quote to back it up. Then you've got the tail. Now, the tail is any extra related information, a bit of background on the business, perhaps, how long you've been around, where you started, who it's founded by, those kind of little extras or details that aren't related to the story, but are also important to kind of set the scene. You would finish with, generally speaking, you finish with the word ends, so that is signifying to the journalist or to the media outlet that story has ended. And then you may have contact details under that. So that's the basic structure of a media release. It is pretty straightforward, but like I said, it takes a bit of practice to get it in the right tone, which is not too excited, not too boring. You have to find that balance, that third person writing style that is very factual but still engaging enough. So you don't want to use any kind of emotion or hype or anything like that. So it kind of goes against anything that you may be writing for marketing, essentially, but you've still got to make it as interesting as possible. So my advice is to practice those, brainstorm a couple of ideas of what might be interesting, practice writing a media release for it, go back and, just try and really follow this structure to get it right. Now, let's say that you've had something interesting to say. You've written your media release, you've reviewed it a couple of times, so you've got it perfect. You now have to get it out. Now, to get good reach with your media releases, you have to have that excellent database that we were speaking about earlier. Now, that would be of consumer media. It could be industry-specific media. You have to have the right contacts to be able to generate that exposure that you're chasing. So that does take time, and it does take a lot of effort. So it is strategic in your approach, which will take you a little bit more time. But at a bare minimum, let's say you didn't have a very well-developed database as yet, I would start to look at outlets like local newspaper, or local broadcasters, which might be TV and radio, if that's relevant to you. Industry-specific publications. So think about your industry. If you have any membership organisations, do they produce any kind of publications? It could be, the Farmers Weekly, or it could be, the Agricultural Association, or, it could be, a local barista magazine, for example. So it really depends on the nature of your business and what sort of industry you're in. But start to think about what are those industry outlets, media outlets that you come across in your day-to-day. If you're a member of any Chamber of Commerce or anything like that, I would certainly send it out through them. Most of those membership-based organisations will have a database, and it could be a database of other small businesses, but certainly that helps to build your credibility amongst industry peers. Or they could have consumer publications as well. So I'd certainly have a look at that, but starting with something like Chamber of Commerce. You might then also, if you haven't had a chance to build or develop your database yet, you might look at greater distribution through a distribution centre. So, media agencies like the Australian Associated Press, for example, and there are some industry-specific media distribution centres as well. But when you're getting it out, you certainly have to make sure that the release is addressed to the right person at whatever the outlet is. Otherwise, they might not receive it. But if you're not sure, so if you're still developing your database, you might want to mark it to the attention of the person's title. So it could be, for example, the travel editor or the food editor. Email distribution is certainly very widely accepted, so that's fine. But where possible, I would say paste your release into the body of an email rather than attaching a PDF or some kind of other attachment. I would also say when you're emailing a media release, absolutely use the subject line for your headline. Okay, so I get media releases all the time, and quite often you'll see something like media release from company XYZ, and that's not very exciting. Whereas if it was the title of the actual media release, it could be a lot more exciting. So consider that. Absolutely Consider though, when you're developing your database and you're developing these media relationships, make sure you know how they like to receive media releases. So make sure that you've considered that. You know, they might say, I'll upload it here, or they might say, yep, if you've got any news, email it through to me. Most likely it will be via email, but it is good to check and see, and then you may need to follow it up with a phone call after you've sent it, for example, just to make sure that they've got it. Definitely send it with high-res images or links to high-res images. Make sure you're not blocking up anyone's email, but yeah, the images and that visual is going to be really important. If you're sending emails by, media releases by email, and you're sending it to a long list of recipients, make sure you use that BCC functionality. You don't want each of their email addresses appearing on their own as recipients on each other's list, if that makes sense. It's very bad email etiquette, and it's breaching some privacy sort of laws as well. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that you might need to tailor your release for each audience. So let's say you've got one story, but you're getting it out to multiple different media outlets. You might have to tailor it a little bit. What's relevant for your local newspaper, for example, might not be relevant to a trade publication or to another sort of outlet. So you might need 2 or 3 versions of the same release. So do keep that in mind. Always using that subject line to get the attention. So keep that in mind. That's really the distribution side of things and media releases. So going back to that peso model, publicity is really what we've been talking about when it comes to media releases and coverage in publications, and that's just about earned media. Whereas public relations is about all media, as we've mentioned. And you're having a look at that model. PR literally fits in within each element of the peso model, and it should be incorporated into your entire marketing strategy. So now we've had a look at paid. We've had a look at, paid is pretty straightforward. We've had a look at earned. We're now going to talk about influencers. Now, influencers sit in both the shared and they cross over into the paid space as well. So keep that in mind. Now, you might have heard the term social influencers. It really isn't anything new. So if you think about social influencers, they've been around in various forms forever. You think about, 100 years ago, there might be a community event and certain people were invited for the other people that would come along if they knew they were going, or, the status that you might get for having people attend certain events. And it's really no different when we talk about social influencers or influencers nowadays. These are people that have some kind of credibility or significant credibility and considerable reach within a target audience. And that really largely does revolve around the internet. Now, influencer marketing is very popular. It's very cost effective, and it can be a very, very effective form of marketing and a great way to generate positive PR. Influencers have this power to affect purchasing decisions of consumers, and that can be for a range of reasons. It can be because of their authority, it could be their knowledge, their position, it could be their relationship that they've built with their audience, and an audience that they actively engage with. So keep that in mind. The key thing here is really audience. So you have to perfectly match their audience to your audience. Now, these people, these influencers could be topic experts, they could be thought leaders, they could be brand advocates, they could be bloggers, YouTubers, podcasters, they could be social media, so Facebook, Instagram, influencers, or celebrities. They could even be journalists themselves, or professional advisors or other industry experts. But they are people that have an above average influence on their audience. Now, I do think that social media has devalued this form of PR because there's a lot of fake or wannabe sort of influencers that will tell small businesses that they've got a huge number of followers. They want something for nothing, to cover your product or service on their socials. So what I want to do today is kind of convey to you that this really is a great form of marketing, and it fits really well into that PR space. However, there is some key criteria that you have to consider when you're making any decisions around influencers. So don't be afraid, because there is, there is a little bit of a scam side to it. But just do your homework and make sure that you're making a very informed decision. Now, in order to do that, first of all, I would say that I think true influencer marketing should be directed by you. For example, you approach them, not the other way around. Also, I will say that influencer marketing is essentially not only just letting them post on their socials, on their blogs, or covering in their outlets, but leveraging the content in your outlets as well. So on your website, your socials, in your blogs, to make sure that you get that extended reach. It can result in a lot of increased traffic to your website, to your social media channels. It can result in leads, in customers. So there are a lot of benefits. And the reason it works is because people do trust friends, colleagues, and experts more than they trust advertising. So these influencers devote a lot of time and resources to creating authentic relationships with people that matter to their business, so their followers or their audience. So it's really important that you choose the right influencer. Their audience absolutely has to match yours. Now, that is the number one criteria to choosing the right influencer. And there are some other criteria which we're going to go through. But I would absolutely make sure that the audience match your specific target market. If they don't, you might get the coverage, you might get the content, you might get absolutely everything that the influencer has promised that you'll get. There's no scam, it's absolutely above board, but you might not get a single hit, a single lead, a single customer as a result. And that's just because you're telling the right message, you're saying the right message, but to the wrong people. So keep that in mind. That audience and the audience demographics is absolutely crucial. They have to match your specific target market. In terms of criteria, you also have to know what the value is to the influencer. So what's in it for them? They're not going to work for free. It could be free products. It could be an experience. There could be a monetary exchange, or there could be a combination of all of those things. But that has to suit your budget as well. So you have to be working within your budget, and there has to be very clear deliverables on that. So you have to know exactly what that influencer is going to deliver for the price that they have quoted. And that price, like I said, it could be an in-kind sort of arrangement, or it could be that they will invoice you a certain amount. But you need to be very clear on what the deliverables are. How many posts are they? Posts, reels, stories, how many blogs are going to be written, where are those blogs, what's the audience, what are the audience demographics, what are the audience numbers? Some of that research you'll get from them, some you'll have to have a look at yourself. You will have to have a look at the reach and the size of their audience yourself, as well as whatever information they tell you. But you have to be really careful not to just get caught up in the size of their audience. You have to start to look at engagement. So look at their past posts, look at the likes, the comments, and the shares that they're getting, and see if they're getting true and genuine conversation on them. Now, normally what you would see, if, in the case of a good influencer that has a dedicated and loyal following, you would see that they might post a product or service or experience. Their audience will start to engage, so they will get a large number of likes and shares of the product, but they'll start to get conversation on them. So, wow, I've been wanting to try that product. Where did you get it? And then they'll go back and reply to that. So really look out for that genuine engagement. What is a big indicator that something's a bit amiss is if you see, a large number of likes but no engagement. You'll always see good quality engagement from an influencer that has a genuine connection with their audience. So keep that in mind. Really look out for engagement. Also look at the quality of their writing style, their photography, how they behave and interact. Does that match how you would speak with your target market? And is that in line with your values as a business? Also, have a look out for any connection that they may have to other influencers. Generally speaking, a good influencer is respected amongst industry peers. So you have a look at the kind of products that they're promoting, have a look at what connection they may have to anyone else that's in the industry. So do your homework, do your research. It is an absolutely amazing form of PR if you pick the influencer right and if you use it right. So I'd encourage you to consider that. Okay, so moving on and looking at now how else you can generate good PR. Well, your customers is a really key area that you can generate good PR and extremely valuable PR, but you have to engage with them. Now, there's an interesting stat that is around 88% of people are influenced by reviews and online comments. So that's that shared media space. So it's really important that you are active in that space or have people active on your behalf. But it's also important that you know what people are saying about you online and that you're part of the conversation, because such a huge percentage of people are influenced by what they read. So it's really important that not only are they reading what your customers are saying, but they're reading what you're saying. Now, it's important also to note that social pressure can tarnish your brand. So as quickly as you're trying to grow it, and you might have spent years building a good brand and really working your socials, for example, but a series of bad reviews and negativity and bad PR online can really impact your brand. You have to keep in mind that fingertips are always on the move. So a key factor of PR is that you are part of that conversation and that you are, keeping on top of anything like that. Now, a big part of that is handling complaints. You think about people that are experiencing your product or service. Now, they could be waiting in line and getting a bit frustrated with the service or how busy you are, or they could have a major service complaint, for example. Now, this isn't always people in front of you. You might have an online business where you've got, something that's not going quite right as well. So I would say that no business is perfect, and virtually everyone in any industry will have to deal with customer complaints at some point. As simple complaint or an extensive complaint, how you handle it makes all the difference. Now, there are some reasons that small businesses in particular don't handle complaints well, and it's generally because people are busy. So being too busy to actually, you're trying to do a million things, you're trying to be the PR manager, plus you're dispatching goods, plus you're responsible for all the back end accounting and HR. So, as a small business owner and manager, you can get too busy to actually even handle things properly in the first place. Or the other thing that I see with small businesses is being defensive. So trying too quickly to come up with a solution, not acknowledging that there's a problem. Or if you've got staff, sometimes it can come down to they're not sufficiently trained in complaint handling, or they don't have any policies or procedures, or there's a procedural kind of breakdown around how they handle it. So any of those reasons, while some of them are quite minor, they can have a very serious impact on that shared media space and result in some very negative PR. You see examples of this all the time online, where there's a minor issue, but it goes viral. And sometimes that's just purely because the business isn't there reading the reviews and able to address it straight away. So I would really say not only do you have to encourage reviews to get the positive reviews to come through, but make sure that you are really listening to what's being said about you online. Now, how you can help bring positive PR from your customers, there's 3 elements to engaging with your customers online or in a social sort of media sense. The first one is to listen. So I was just sort of talking about that, where you can listen to what's being said online. You can be listening to the reviews. If there's common things that are being said about you, then perhaps it is time to make some changes. So have a look at Google reviews, have a look at your Facebook reviews, or any other industry review sites that you're a part of. It could be TripAdvisor, it could be Yelp. There's tons of different review sites. Make sure that you are listening to what's being said. Listen out for mentions of your business, competitors. Have a look at what they're doing. It does really help to know what your competitors are doing, because it could identify trends or areas for improvement, or things that you might want to change as well. Then I would say talk. So talk back to your customers and to the general public online. Talk with pictures, talk with media releases to to news outlets, engage with your customers in social media when they're talking to you, talk back. Also engage with influencers. The other thing I would say about the talking aspect is to talk to customers when they're physically with you and try to encourage them to take that conversation online as well. So if you see someone having a great time or taking photos of their experience or their, product or whatever that might be, try and get them to engage with you. If you've taken a great photo, post it on our Facebook page for your chance to be featured, and those kind of conversations can happen offline as well. The last element is to support your customers, direct them to channels where they can talk to you. So provide your links to social media wherever possible. Advertise them by way of, it could be as simple as your email footer to your website, to actually offline. So you might have posters at your venue, for example, that say how people can engage with you by way of hashtags and handles. Make it as easy as possible for them to find. That then gives them the ability to talk to you and you something to listen to and the ability to talk back to them. So it is very much a cycle. So that's sort of the more positive side of PR. Keep in mind that crises do occur. Now, even if you're doing everything right in business, sometimes, there is a crisis situation, and to get through it the most effective way, you should have a plan. So hopefully this is a plan that you never have to use. So we're not going to go into this in any detail, but I will just really quickly say, absolutely have a crisis plan before a crisis strikes, because you never know when it may strike. Within that plan, identify a spokesperson. So as long as everybody knows who is the person that's responsible for talking to the customers, talking to the media, and it is one clear, defined person, it makes things a lot more streamlined and a lot more easy to get through a crisis situation. Now, that spokesperson needs to provide information in a timely manner, which is really, really important in a crisis situation, but they have to be honest and open and transparent, particularly with so much consumer conversation online. And, we go back to having a look at some of those first slides where we were talking about how empowered customers are. There's no point trying to hide any kind of situation. That openness, honesty, and transparency is absolutely crucial. It's also really important that person that is sort of heading up the PR crisis keeps employees and stakeholders informed, as well as customers and suppliers. So thinking about who the key stakeholders are in the situation, and that everyone is updated early and often. And that really nips any rumours in the bud. So I'd keep that in mind. Sometimes it's appropriate to put these things on social media. Sometimes it's more appropriate just to address them internally to your customers, to the media if it gets that far, rather than putting it on social. So keep that in mind. But the key message here is just have a plan, and within that plan, know who the go-to person is. Okay, so we've just about come to the end of today's webinar. I hope it's given you a greater understanding of PR, looking at the paid, the earned, the shared, and the owned elements. And I also hope that you will be more confident to build your brand, I should say, across all of those areas. So some top tips before we do finish up are, first of all, to always factor in the peso model and don't leave out any component. So like I said at the beginning, perhaps even just write a list of what you're doing in all of these areas now, and identify if there's any gaps. Create media releases. They are very important. If you can craft some compelling stories on anything that's new or interesting that's happening within your business, aim for a bit of a target of at least just a few per year, and try and stay on track with that and get them out to get that earned space. Certainly look as a small business at promoting your story or your expertise and that of others in your small business. And now you can promote that in your owned, your earned, and your shared media. And the more personal you make it, telling the story of yourself, the story behind your brand, the more engaging and relatable it is to consumers. So I think that works really well for small business. Now, for cheap or effective PR opportunities, I would look at sponsorship or participating in charitable and community events. but make sure that they're relevant to your industry or to your business, and make sure that the audience perfectly matches yours. So I get asked this all the time about sponsorship opportunities. And if you had, let's say, a dinner that you could sponsor, and every single person in that audience, or the large majority of people in that audience, would be likely to purchase from you, then it would be a good opportunity to be a sponsor of that event and have your brand and your logo in front of those people. If no one there, or the minority of people would be interested, then it's not a good opportunity. So really weigh that up and make sure that the audience always matches. I would also say reach out to influencers in your industry. Influencers do work. It's a great opportunity. Do your research, follow that criteria that we discussed, and I think you'll have success in that area, and very cost effective. So it's great for small businesses. Now, my last tip is to use Google Alerts to track what's being said about you online. So have a look. If you haven't already set up Google Alerts, you set them up in your Google account. You choose keywords that Google reports on, and once you've set it up, you will simply get a notification via email anytime those keywords appear. So make the keywords specific, but normally what you would see by way of a Google alert is at the very least your business name. So anytime your business name pops up on Google or appears online, you will get a notification. So it's a good way to track. You might have mentions of your business on, let's say there's a blogger comes to experience your product or service, but they're just a normal customer. They never tell you that they're a blogger, but they do go and feature your product or service in their blog. They might not link back to your website, but you might see that come up. You can then contact them and ask for a link perhaps, or establish a bit of a further relationship. So Google Alerts are fantastic for a bit of tracking of what's being said online. So keep that in mind. Now that's it from me. If you do have any questions, I'm going to stay online now for a couple of minutes to answer them. So please shoot them through by way of the chat or the Q&A functionality. We have just scratched the surface today. So if you do want to know more, keep in mind you can book a one-on-one appointment with any range of our digital solutions advisors. We have about 90 or more across WA, Queensland and NT. Now, as part of this government program, you get access to up to 3 hours of one-on-one appointments with an advisor, plus you can make up the rest of that 7-hour package by way of workshops and webinars across a range of subjects and topics, including media and PR, and social media and that online space, a lot of what we've spoken about today. There is a little bit of key criteria. You have to have an ABN that's registered in WA, Queensland or NT. You have to be operating for profit and employ fewer than 20 full-time staff. So if that suits your business, I would highly encourage you to take advantage of this Commonwealth Government program. I will stay on the line now and answer any questions that you have, but thanks again for joining me today, and good luck with your media and PR efforts.